This little video is to answer a question which somebody very kindly left on my last video. And the question he asked was, tell us about Nehruvians. Who are the Nehruvians? What's that about? And I thought this is a very interesting question because I just Googled it, and you don't really have a bunch of people listed as these are the Nehruvians. Whereas, for example, the historian Andrew Roberts, he's written a book called Eminent Churchillians, and there's a list of people, and you can say yes, these are followers of Churchill. They're associated with Churchill. They share some traits with him. But who are the eminent Nehruvians? And off the top of your hat, you can give a few answers. But the moment you start doing that, you notice that it isn't really true. For example, if I said Rafi Ahmed Kidwai, of course he's a Nehruvian. What else is he? But he isn't really, because, actually Sheikh Abdullah was more Nehruvian. But then, they're going in separate directions, and ultimately it was Rafi Ahmed Kidwai who ensures that Sheikh Abdullah goes to jail. So Shama Prasad Mukherjee was avenged by Kidwai. You see, the thing is that Kidwai was, absolutely, he's a brilliant man, no question. And I'll be very frank with you and say that India lost so many great families from Bihar, UP, elsewhere. But not from Tamil Nadu, because, there's a barrier of language. So we kept our Muslims. Apparently in Kerala, where there is, of course, still a very active Muslim league, apparently, I think 3 or 4 people did make the hijrah. They did go to Pakistan, and they were very successful there. But, that was symbolic, because we can't emigrate to Pakistan because we don't speak Urdu. We speak Tamil or Malayalam. And I think for that reason, we don't really have this Hindu-Muslim thing at all. So, for example, I'm Tamil. The very last, what is known as, Avadhani, Shata Avadhanim. It's Avadhani, that's a type of mental preparedness whereby you can give poetic answers to 100 different questions. You remember all the questions, and in a poetic form you answer all of them. It's a sort of display of mental power, but and of mastery of the language. And the very last, as far as I know, Ardhana of the Tamil. I mean, now you have in Telugu, you have in Sanskrit, you have, but not so much. I've not heard. I may be wrong. But as far as I know, the last one was Muslim, and so that the very idea that there can be that can be a divide among Tamils on the basis of religion, it's not it's something I can't get my head around. But I can understand what was happening in North India, and obviously it was a bad type of a deception and fraud that was committed on the Muslims of Bihar and UP by the Muslim League. But I think, I seem to remember that, like the Raja of Mahmudabad, I think his descendant is in India, just as the descendant of Muhammad Ali Jinnah is one of the wealthiest Parsis. He's been readmitted into the Parsi fold, because he comes from a very distinguished family. So, so really, Hindus aren't at all bothered about these things. But we do absolutely resent any type of condoning of sedition or of terrorism. But that's also true of Muslims living here in Britain, where I live. We got very angry with successive governments, both Tories and, but more it was Labour, that they'd get comfortable with some guy with a hook on his hand, and they'd tell the police not to interfere when this guy with the hook. I'm not joking, the guy had a hook. And he took over a mosque, which was here in London, which was built by absolutely decent people from their savings, And suddenly they're chased out of their own mosque by some crazy guy. They call the police. Police said, "Oh well, it's a religious matter. We can't interfere." Of course they can interfere. This is England. There's a law, and basically the law was, let's be nice to the terrorists, so that they go and bomb other countries, and they won't bomb us. But then in 2004, they started attacking us. So. And then, Labour government, they paid a lot of money to really worthless people to de-radicalize. But their own brothers and sisters, or not sisters, but brothers were running amok, knifing people. So, this is the liberal craziness, holier than thou, virtue signaling, so-called secularism, which is about find the craziest nutter of who's supposed to represent religion and show how sweet and nice you are by cuddling with him, and until he starts chopping your head off. But but that has nothing to do with Nehru. He was never an appeaser or anything of that sort. Indeed, let's face it, he presided over a massive ethnic cleansing of Muslims, which is a pity because you're losing talent, you're losing labor power. Either they're educated people, or they're entrepreneurs, or they are workers, and we need the workers. Birla and so forth, and the Sikhs and the Biharis in Calcutta, when Shoravardi made his move to try to secure Calcutta for Pakistan, it wasn't really the Hindu Bengalis who, the Bhadralok, it wasn't they who fought back, because, they had a different relationship with, after all, that fellow Bengali people. But, the non-Bengali, obviously, they thought that we'll be driven out, we'll lose all our investment. So they put the money on the table for the knife, for their thugs to come out and use their knives. And the reason that Mahatma Gandhi and Shoravardi and Mahatma Gandhi, they stayed together to bring peace to Calcutta. But what was that about? See, Shoravardi was a lawyer whose clients were thugs. And what had happened was that the Hindu Birlas and so forth, they said, yeah, now it's fine, we've won. We don't want to scare off our labor pool. We don't want the workers to run away. We want them to stay. So this is a deal where basically the killers were saying, yeah, well, we're paid for the killing that we've done up till now, but now there's no more money to be made, so we've come to say, we're... Next time you need us, pay, and we will be there to cut and to kill. But till then, ahimsa, ram, ram, ram. And of course, the beautiful thing about Mahatma Gandhi is that if you went to him and you said, I just killed some people, so you don't do it again. अच्छी बात नहीं है तो आगे से मत करना, and then it's over. So when Gandhi went to Bihar, and all the Congress fellows stand up, Gandhi ji, kaise hai? In 1946. He says, I know all of you have been going and killing the Muslims. Why? Please. But if he knows that they've been killing Muslims, and in fact it was an open secret, then why the hell did he not expel them from Congress party at the least? The guy had been trained as a lawyer, and he had an actual duty that if he has knowledge of cognizable offences, why didn't he tell the district magistrate? At least he should have said, look, there is such a thing as the law. You should go to jail. Or if you don't believe in the law, you're an anarchist or whatever, at least you should say, get the fuck away from me, you reek of blood. Go and do प्रायश्चित. कम से कम हिंदू हो तो प्रायश्चित में जाके करो. यहाँ क्यों बैठ के हो, reeking of blood. But you see, this is the beauty of Gandhi and Nehru and so on. People say, they were defending Muslims. They weren't. They were saying, no, don't. And of course, it's obvious, don't. Don't chase away educated, good people. Don't go spend all your time raping. What's the, go to work, get a bloody job. Killing is not a job. Raping is not a job. Bhai, kuch kaam karo. Go to the office. And that's obvious. And yet, people say, oh, they're so saintly. That they were the elected holders of power, and they were saying, oh, don't go on killing. But what are they supposed to say? Kill? Nobody does. At the least, they should have said, oh, we'll do directed killing, kill the guys with the property, and take their property, and give us a share. But at least they went that evil. Anyway, so who or what is a Nehruvian? Well, firstly, let's notice that the real Nehru is Motilal Nehru. So we're talking about dynastic politics. Now, why did dynastic politics appear not just in India but also in England? In fact, India was imitating England, because there you have people like Randolph Churchill and then Winston Churchill, who comes into politics saying that I'm carrying on the legacy of my father. You have Joseph Chamberlain, and then you have Neville Chamberlain and Joseph Chamberlain. So, and there are, you can go on multiplying such instances, and it's not something which has completely vanished from British politics or from American politics. But why does it exist? And the answer is that, you see, these types of dynastic politicians, they represent a particular interest group, and they build up a network which is capable of forming a government, or at least contributing to the forming of a government. So these are people who have administrative and other skills. They represent particular interests, and they are trusted to do so because it's a dynastic sort of a business. It's like a family business. So you're conserving a client list, and you're preserving goodwill. Father dies, son takes over. Son dies, daughter takes over. And the network, the broader, the system of patronage, the family retainers, everybody's taken care of. And most importantly, any if somebody's owed a favor, there's a favor bank. The favor bank remains solvent. There's favors coming in and favors going out, favors being returned. So this is important. So the first thing we notice is that Nehru is, it's a dynasty, and it's the most successful dynasty. It remains in operation, and the only reason that Rahul did not become prime minister is because Daddy and Granny were shot, were blown up, and why not wait? He's only 50 years old, and he can do one-arm push-ups. So, let him take office when he's 60 or 70 or 80. He'll be fine. What's the rush to get shot? Because, the problem in India is that autocracy is tempered by assassination. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi, he had a lot of power, but if people felt he wasn't using it very responsibly, he'd get shot. Rajiv Gandhi, VP Singh had tried to replace him and said, let's have some, a clean administration. But VP Singh was, he was fooled into going after Advani, so he collapsed. And then it was obvious Rajiv will come back. But then, unfortunately, for some other reason, he was killed, though you have to wonder whether maybe like Mahatma Gandhi, maybe Mahatma Gandhi didn't receive the proper level of protection, maybe maybe Indira Gandhi didn't receive the proper level of protection, maybe Rajiv Gandhi didn't receive the proper level of protection, because if they are killed, then Congress benefits. And, I think Rahul's genius is to show that he is the biggest liability of the Congress party. If he is killed, there won't be any sympathy for Congress. Instead, they'll be badai ho, now you can do something. Maybe Priyanka ko uthao. So there'll be no sympathy. They'll be congratulated. So he's very clever, you see. So he'll remain alive, and Modi is doing a good job. But Modi, after all, he will age out as Vajpayee aged out. Advani refused to age out, but I mean, come on. It's ludicrous for a man of his age to be, to say, I'll be Prime Minister. And of course, we had Morarji, who's very old and completely useless. So, but what is the Nehruvian brand? Who does it? How did it arise, and what does it comprise of? So, to answer that, we need to look at what is the origin of this family, and the answer is they're Kashmiri Kauls. Now, the Kashmiri Kauls were, 1,000 years ago, at the time of Abhinavagupta, they had an all-India reputation for erudition. And this was at the time when Tantra was the cat's whiskers. So they're known as, having mastered Tantra. And that's why, incidentally, they have a fascination both with Kerala, where the Namudris adopted, they developed, those innovations, if they were innovations, unless they had pre-existed, I don't know. And that's very interesting because you see, the Nambudris came to Kerala through Tamil Nadu, and yet, they have some features which are not present along their migration route. And so, this is a question of their sort of cultivating this, and this is something which was not. It's nothing atavistic. It's something which was very deliberate, and it really represents that 1,000 years ago, Kerala and Kashmir, they are really vying for, they're going for absolute academic excellence. At a later point, Bengal also, they took a different tack. They took the Navya Nyaya tack. And Navya Nyaya was very, very, it spread. It wasn't accepted. Nyaya was never, as a school it was not accepted, but as a methodology, it had a big impact. So, what I'm saying is that the fascination that the Nehru family has with esoteric Buddhism, in which, the third turning of the Sangha is towards Tantra. And you'll also find that they have a fascination with Malayalis. Like Krishna Menon, madcap Menon, completely mad. But somehow he was fascinated, on Mathai, or, they used to say that to get anything done in Delhi in the 50s, you had to run from Pillai to Pillai. No, it's true that the Malayalis were absolutely superb. They're the best administrators, and, VP Menon, and who's the 8th standard pass. But he helped Sardar Patel to, he made a huge contribution. But I'm going to mention what I'm going to say is that the Krishna Menon is not really a Nehruvian. I'll explain why. On the other hand, if you look at Sir Raghavan Pillai, you can say he is Nehruvian. But you can't say that about KPS Menon or the Menon dynasty. They're not really Nehruvian. This is because the KPS Menon dynasty is actually, they are, the father-in-law was Sir Shankaran Nair. So they represent the older ICS tradition. And that's not a Nehruvian tradition. So these sort of distinctions have to be made. Kidwai, he worked closely with or you could even say he was a retainer, or he was like a client, or, well, not a client, but he was an employee, you could say, because he was young when he started off. But Kidwai always, he had a different agenda, and it's very, very specific to North India. It has features like Shia-Sunni divide. It does have that. Whereas, for the Nehrus and for Hindus, we don't even understand it. It's immaterial to us. But these things are important in that part of the world for historical reasons. And you can say that there are Gandhian Muslims, but you cannot say that the Muslims who were associated with Nehru, you cannot say they're Nehruvian Muslims. Maulana Azad is not Nehruvian. Who is? Okay, maybe you can say Chagla. Chagla you could say. But, who did, Chagla is basically a guy who didn't get what Muhammad Ali Jinnah was trying to do. He was junior. He was the junior of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, at the time when they were negotiating, in fact, with Sapru. And, Jinnah had to go to be with his wife who was dying. And Chagla, he sold the pass. He didn't get it. He didn't understand his brief. And Sapru was crowing about it to Jinnah, saying, "Ha ha, trick to you, you see, your junior's rubbish." I fooled him. And Jinnah didn't like that because he said, "Look, this isn't money. We're not talking about, a legal case. This is politics." So, Mullah Sapru, as he was known, because of his mastery of Arabic and Persian, the Indian liberals really, on the surface, if you look at, the surface, you could say, oh, Sapru has made such a big contribution. The truth is, they didn't understand what really needed to be done, where the compromise had to be made. They didn't get it. Now, let me return now to Nehru and why suddenly Motilal Nehru gained enormous salience. So, firstly, I should explain that the Nehru family, apart from being descended from Kola Abhinava Gupta's sect of Brahmins, very, intellectually supposed to be good. Apart from that, you see, in the beginning of the 18th century, one of, the founder, he was a good Persian poet, so he was invited down to Delhi, and ultimately the family, they were really minor bureaucracy. But they were part of that Mughal world, and respectable family, maybe Kotwal, but then Kotwal who turns into Vakil for the East India Company. So they're, unki auqat, it's absolutely transparent. And the Muslim princes or any families, they could say, who is this guy? And his son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. They can see the whole unki auqat, it's absolutely transparent. Decent people, middle level, and Motilal, yes, he rose up, but by his own effort, just as Jinnah rose by his own oratory and personality, or Chittaranjan Das, or Vallabhai or Patel or his brother. See, all these guys, they are superstars because they rose by their own effort. They're very smart. Now, the importance that Nehru had for Hindus was that, you see, the Kauls were rather a small community. Now, the ones in Kashmir, yes, they were landlords, but they're rather lackadaisical about it. They weren't very committed to that. And to be frank, if the British had taken Kashmir Valley, which is peaceful, then, you see, the Dogras would still have been going into the army. They'd be fine. Poonch would still have to be policed by the British, because it would be too, it's a different matter. But Valley would have prospered because the call and the sheikhs and so on of the Valley. There's a modus vivendi. You want to get rid of feudal practices. You want to raise agricultural productivity. You want to boost cottage industries. So there's a modus vivendi. That area would have prospered. That's what didn't happen under Dogra rule, particularly because you had a rather bad Maharaja, unfortunate. If Karan Singh, who was good, if he had been there or somebody else had been there, then, but there was, at one period, there was a rather bad, rather debauched Maharaja. In fact, I remember in our law lecture, the case of this Maharaja came up, a blackmail case. He's been blackmailed for £1 million or something, and this was under the law of sovereign immunity. Now the Kauls, you see, did well in education. They did well in trade, but they were rather thin on the ground. And unlike the Kayas of Bihar or the Bhumihars and Kayas in, or even Punjabi in Bengal, They had not really turned into big landowners. They had some land, but it wasn't. They were not really. They had not elevated themselves to that extent of being rajas. So they were agents. They were not principals, and they were really strangers in a strange land. They were accepted, but they were defensive. The saying was that if anybody asks, they said that don't say that you're a call. I mean, in fact, the name is called, so obviously they're Kapalikas. But, it was like, pretend to be like a Vaishnav, and if anybody asks, say you're Shaivite. Shaivite is okay. So it's like takiya. It's like keeping, keep quiet about your actual beliefs. So there's this defensive element. They were thin on the ground. And one reason why Motilal Nehru, apart from the fact that the British respected him for his standing up to them, but for his excellent personality, I should also mention that his first language was Persian. By the age of 12, he was absolutely fluent in every Hafiz and Attar and all this Saadi. He could quote it by the ream. But he took to English and he finally mastered it, and wonderful. He was a family man. That's the other thing about the calls. Good family values, rather than just running after dancing girls and spending money. Now, Motilal became a hero to people like Rajendra Prasad in Calcutta or other places. The Bihari caste or the UP people. You see, because his caste fellows in Allahabad, they said that, look, you can't cross the black water because we're on thin ice, and you'll lose caste. I mean, you'll have to do the Prayashitam. It'll be awkward. Who will do the Prayashitam ceremonies? Will the local Brahmins turn up or not, or will we be outcasted? Kya hoga? Why do you have to go to Britain to become a barrister? You're earning plenty, and what's this nonsense about sending your son there? Come on. No need for all this. Or even, okay, if you send a boy, when he comes back, then you can dip him 10 times in the Ganges and marry him off. Make him eat a lot of cow dung and drink some cow urine. Shuddhify him and marry him off. What hai bhai? What is this nonsense of yourself going to, But he took a very strong line with them. He said, I know which of you bastards are whispering against me, and I will drag you into court and I'll hammer you, I'll bankrupt you. Tujhe main nanga kar dunga. So then they said, oh, force majeure. You see, in Hinduism, this is a force majeure is apad dharma. So the moment you say any apad dharma, we can, tapad marega. We can do nothing. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Doctrine of exigent circumstances is perfectly sensible. And but this was a heroic action. And Rajendra Babu, absolutely brilliant chap. And he was trying to defend one fellow caste, Bihari caste, who had crossed the black water. But his uncle, and the uncle was such a absolutely rational and patriotic and advanced person. But you see, and if you read what Rajendra Babu has written about how Parda was destroying lives of the poorer Bihari caste women, destroying their health, really terrible. So they were really, just as in other parts of India, like in South India, we were problem of child marriage and widow, and then, widow not being remarried. My God, it was heartbreaking. That's why all Hindus absolutely wanted to change. They wanted democracy because that legitimates the passing of a law, so that you have this change. Because if you don't pass the law, then, you have what's called wasteful competition, where, you can't do something sensible because you're afraid then your status falls relative to the other guy. So if you just have a law which says this is banned, then everybody is happy and we can come up. We can still compete, But now we can compete on things like, who is getting more kids into the IAS, or more kids are doing well in business, or, you compete on things which are good rather than wasteful, because it's very, very horrible to compete by being nasty to your women. What's next? Parda, uske baad kya? When a girl comes into our house, we drop her down a dark well and we put a cover over it. You people are only doing parda. कुआं में डुबाते हैं immediately. What's next? After that, what do you do? So, Nehru's, that way they were good. But this does not explain how they gain salience. And the answer really has to do with the foundation of the Hindu Mahasabha, which happens, about 8 or 9 years after the Muslim League is founded. So this was during the war. And now it was absolutely imperative that, that if actual Hindus don't create a Hindu Mahasabha, then 90% she will be. So some lady from England will be her sister Nivedita, some lady from Ireland. Or if the Hindu men don't create a Hindu Mahasabha, English ladies will do so. This is the problem. And of course, yes, within Hindu Mahasabha, no doubt, there were some people who were very afraid of Muslims or who had prejudice, and especially if in your family something had happened, forcible conversion or killing or whatever. That's quite true. But you can't say that Hindu Mahasabha was being created with any evil intention to expel Christians and Muslims and so on. It's not true. There's just no evidence of that. But there again, and it's very noticeable that, like Mahatma Gandhi, he turned up for a bit. In fact, it was the Arya Samaji leader who gave him the title of Mahatma. And in exchange, he went up one. He became a Swami. So, you be Mahatma, I'll be Swami. And they all gave each other titles. So, but there, Motilal Nehru represents the pro-Muslim element within the Hindu Mahasabha, and he gained salience because, you see, it was known, it was obvious कि उनकी औकात ऐसी है that Muslims will trust him. Of course they will. Of course they will. And if they want to talk to him in Persian, he will bloody talk to them, in double Dutch Persian, Persian squared. Because he loved it. That was his, and his great-great-great-great-grandfather was a Persian poet. So absolutely no problem there. And, you see, because whether Muslims or Hindus of that class, their idea was not to expel or get rid of the other. It was just that, okay, we're the majority, so we'll take the lead. But you join us because you can trust us. And Jinnah, he's a guy who, of course, was trusted by Hindus and so on, because he's basically a Gujarati Khoja, and he's the first generation in his family to actually have a Muslim name. Previously, they were keeping Hindu names because they were Ismaili. They had to run away from Sindh because of persecution, so come on. And it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that any ancient Gujarati families, like Banyas or like Mohd Banyas, or that they don't get on with Menons. You may as well say that they don't get on with Memons, or with Khojas or with Bohras. You may as well say they don't get on with Jains or Parsis. Come on. Don't be crazy. Now, I should also explain that the leadership of the Indian National Congress, when it was in Parsi hands, it had a very different flavor and it was following a different trajectory. This is because the Parsis, they're a mercantile community who from the early part of the 19th century, a maritime community, they become a maritime community. They were engaged in overseas trade. And they saw a different perspective because there was actual drain based upon manipulation of terms of trade, of currency, the exchange rate, and so forth. So they had a different perspective. Whereas, in UP or Bihar and so on, there was minimal drain. There was maximal exploitation, but there was minimal drain. So these are the facts. So, you have to understand that that especially the western coast, focused in Bombay, is going to have a different trajectory, and that very often those guys are saying, it makes no sense to anybody else. Because, you say, yeah, drain. But we can look around and we know that there's nothing to bloody steal over here. Where will the British get something to steal? And there was only one place, and it was Champaran, Indigo. But Indigo had been mentioned, Neil Darpan and all that, in the 1850s, 1860s. Now, there's a book by Otto Trevelyan. What's it called? Letters of a Competition Wala. Now, Trevelyan, is an Oxford graduate or Cambridge or whatever, and he wrote in a very facetious, Latinate, scholarly style. So that book became a bestseller, and people in America would read it and so on, because, they'd say, this is how, a good classical scholar from Oxford writes the Queen's English. And there's a long chapter on this, on Champaran and on the Anglo-Saxon party, by which he meant the settlers, the people who came to, there were carpetbaggers who came to grab stuff. But the fact is, the place is so poor, you can't really grab very much. And in fact, Lord Curzon, he had an American millionaire as a guest. And the American millionaire, he looked around and he said, look, I want to do something in return. And Curzon said, well, what do you suggest? He said, okay, look, I'll set up an agricultural institute, because you're an agricultural country, you've got great land, you've got water, you've got everything. But by the way, your people are extremely thin and, And one of the things that these guys discovered almost immediately, the moment you start doing some research, is that indigo doesn't pay. And there was some byproduct which could have some use, and there was a little bit. But really, what needed to happen was to switch from indigo to tobacco. In fact, ITC, that's where it started to make a lot of money. So anyway, why did Gandhi go to Champaran, by the way? Answer is that this was a time, in 1917, when the Hindus basically go into all the villages, in every village in Bihar, they beat the Muslims until they give up, cow slaughter. And police and so on would turn up, but by then these guys have gone on to the next village. They've disappeared. They've melted into the... So there's massive violence going on. Not much killing. Because, a bunch of guys turn up and they beat you, or they don't even have to beat you, but basically, they make their point. So really at this point, Muslims of Bihar say, yeah, well, screw cow slaughter, which in any case aristocracy was not interested in. Cow slaughter was a demand of the lower middle class, which was rising up. And in fact, that's what contributed in the early 19th century. That's where you get the communal rioting and the attempt to... a complete poisoning of the atmosphere. That was not an upper class thing. It was lower middle class thing, which makes sense, because if you're rich, you're getting your chicken and your mutton. But if you're poor, you want your beef. One cow produces a lot of meat. Whereas if you're rich, what do you fancy? Yes, bring me some chicken. Yeah, you go out and throttle a couple of chickens. Want lamb? Ek do bakri ko kato. No need to kill a whole cow, because the meat will go bad. So, just as Mahatma Gandhi, he was brought in for a cosmetic purpose, but he did a brilliant job. And Rajendra Babu and Rajkishore Prasad, who was Jayaprakash Narayan's, he became his father-in-law. These guys, they jumped on it. Motilal was, of course, he was skeptical because he's going, who's this crazy guy? What is this nonsense? But, he had to see that because Gandhi was the man on the spot when the Muslims were being beaten and they gave up caste slaughter. So he was the go-to man for the Muslims because they're going, okay, we give up caste slaughter and you support Khilafat. Done deal. And that's actually, it's a good deal because basically what the Hindu and Muslim educated classes could agree on is that, yes, we have a common enemy in Western imperialism. We want to, and the other thing is that you had 100,000 Indian troops, this is after the war, in the MENA, So in other words, India was garrisoning the conquests which Britain had made, and it was securing France's position in Syria and so forth. So during the First World War, for the very first time in history, India had force projection not to Europe, to MENA, and so forth. So this was an extraordinary situation. In 1914, nobody would have predicted that India could actually sway the global balance of power through its own Indian soldiers. So this was something unprecedented. Other thing about the First World War is it shows that there are no bloody martial races or castes or whatever. In fact, it showed the entire world that war is not the sport of kings. War is about industrial proletariats producing lots of guns. And in fact, women can work in the factories to produce the guns. And but you need men, lots and lots of men. It doesn't matter whether they have a nice moustache and a big chest. Doesn't matter. They just have to be able to lift a gun, go there, shoot, get killed, and then more come in. So war was now industrial, it was working class, it was proletarian. So these changes had, they had influenced everybody. The Muslims were saying, look, as Muslims, we are absolutely united from Morocco through Africa up to Indonesia. We want the white man out. We want no more of colonialism. British weren't that bad, but if you see what some of the French were doing, for example, in Tunisia, in 1930, they had some crazy idea. They brought in hundreds of thousands of, huge big crowds of, tens of thousands, dressed up as crusaders, waving swords and, parading around, to insult and humiliate the Muslims of Tunisia, to basically say, we won the Crusades, you're now slaves and will always be slaves. This is an outrageous insult. And it was deliberate. It was racialist and it was based on religion. British weren't doing that much. Though Allenby, when he marched into Jerusalem, Archbishop made all types of statements, Archbishop of Canterbury. So let me tell you that you could not call yourself a Muslim. You could not say that you were observing your faith if you remained silent under such a terrible insult. Now, of course, Hindus are not concerned. We'd already been conquered. But you see, it's not really that much of an insult to us, because basically we say that if the king is good, that's fine. And the king was good. The king was promoting Sanskrit, and this actually is promoting Tamil and Gujarati, and that will be good for us. And as I said, if Kashmir really had come under direct British rule, or if it had a better king, it'll be fine now. It'll be wonderful. But we can also, if Punjab had had a better British governor on two separate different occasions, also if it had had a better Chief Justice on one occasion, there would have been no partition. In other words, stupidity and malice can achieve terrible results. The reason I'm saying this is that, in what you have in Punjab, there's a very brilliant man. In fact, he got a scholarship to study maths at Cambridge in 1890 or thereabouts. And he started to take the lectures of Alfred Marshall. So if you're a good mathematician and you listen to Marshall, you know as much economics as anybody now alive knows, in practical terms. And this guy is brilliant, Lala Harkishan Lal Goba. And he came back. Of course, first he has to be a lawyer, but then he starts making money, setting up factories, and then because of the maths and the knowledge of economics, banking is so important. Finance is, if you have good finance in Punjab, undivided Punjab, which has tremendous, scale and scope economies. It had very decent. Basically it's flat. You don't have many mountains and forests, so you've got a large contiguous area, which can just have very rapid socioeconomic growth, wealth creation. And once that's happening, the Punjabi ethos. You have to admit that Punjabi spirituality and morality is not divisive at all. It's absolutely not divisive, But crazy, stupid, really these are proto-leftist policies. The proto-leftist policy of saying, oh, the Hindu trader, Mahajan, he's a usurer and we must protect the cultivating classes. And then there are the other more martial classes, which basically means that if you put on a turban and have beard, then you're martial. Then if you don't, you're not. So younger brother isn't, elder brother is, or something like that. It's just mad and stupid. Grow your moustache and you are martial caste. Kya hai? So all this stupidity and nonsense. But it was supposedly, it's proto-left wing, really, And it's hurt Punjab. Once you make any distinction of gender or of this or that, you're screwing up the economy. And when you screw up the economy, then, it's not that poverty is created. It's not just poverty. Hatred is created. So, and the only, what does non-violence actually mean? What can non-violence achieve? The answer is non-violence means money. When you buy something and you say, that's non-violent. Instead of going and grab, that's violent. But non-violence is better than violence because we know that, it's obvious. That's how you can have a flourishing economy. That's how we can be well-dressed and have electricity and so on. I go to the McDonald's, I don't go, give me a burger, or I punch you. No. They make more burgers because there's a demand and they're not having to waste money on hiring tough guys. So, anyway, I'm just, so far I've spoken of the situation coming up to 1918, 1919, and we've noticed that Nehru really has lost salience. Because what's happened is that the Muslims want to do a deal with a tough guy. But who's a tough guy? Basically, it's Gandhi, because it looks like Gandhi was in Bihar to give cover. He's saying, no, I'm fighting the white guy in Champaran. They went, while the Hindu-Muslim riots are going on, the cow slaughter protection thing is going on. So, but there's a deal. We do a deal. Khilafat for cow. And there also, Gandhi said, no, well, look, because obviously, if we unite, really, people who knew the international situation, people who read what the chief of the Imperial Army staff, what was his name, Henry Wilson, was it? So he actually, he said that Britain does not have enough manpower to hold Egypt. And in fact, Allenby, he insisted that the UDI of Egypt, the unilateral declaration of independence of Egypt, he insisted. He said, you must accept it, otherwise I'll resign. The chief of staff was saying, we don't have the men to win in Turkey. And in fact, by 1922, it was all over. We don't have the men in India. We don't have the men in Ireland. And the shocking part, we don't have enough men in England. What did he mean? The answer is that, you see, you'd had the Bolshevik Revolution, and you had a a tinderbox of a situation within Britain itself. Ireland was in flames, but it could easily happen that if one stupid, territorial army captain or major or whatever, suppose he said, shoot at these striking mill workers or these striking dock workers. Suppose there had been a Jallianwala Bagh in England. The whole place would have gone up in flames. That's what the upper class believed, because they thought that Britain was riddled with Soviet spies and with Jews. Oh, they believed that incidentally they were crazy. About the Young Turks in Turkey. This is back in 1908, or a little bit earlier. And you have two absolutely mad British diplomats writing that if each and every one of these young Turks is actually Jewish. So if the name is Mehmet, it's actually Moshe. So this type of madness, it's when you see the stupidity of some element of the British imperial power elite, you have to wonder, how did they survive? And the answer is Mahatma Gandhi. But however stupid you are, I can be more stupid. And the amazing thing, of course, is that Motilal Nehru, who was not stupid, but he ended up doing something even stupider than Mahatma Gandhi, which is why we are now ruled, which is why there is a Nehru-Gandhi dynasty. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi also has sons, and incidentally one of them did stand for election. In fact, he stood for election against Rajiv in Amethi, lost his deposit. So, in other words, how did Motilal prevail over the Mahatma in the end, in the dynastic terms? The answer is that Mahatma Gandhi was merely so stupid as to pretend that he would die for Khilafat, which no Hindu will do. And he surrendered. He unilaterally surrendered in 1922 because Britain was at its weakest then. And if India had not surrendered unilaterally, then by 1924, Olivier would have been instead of the Secretary of State for India being Olivier, it would have been Colonel Wedgwood, and India gets pretty much what it was asking for, and the Hindus and Muslims and so on, they'd have been fine. They'd have worked together. Why? Because the Muslims really wanted the Middle East and so on cleansed of the Crusader. Hindus, it was in our interest for that to happen. So there's a joint program. And the other thing is that, if you take control of your own fiscal and monetary policy, people like Vishvesharaya, and there were plenty of Muslim equivalents, engineers, entrepreneurs, and so on, and they knew how to increase the GDP and to increase the tax take and spend the taxes properly. People like Nawab of Chhatri, gentleman, a guy who, he couldn't go to college because his dad died and he didn't have much money. So he comes back and he looks after the farm, or the small estate, increases the estate. British say, great, so they give him the title of Nawab, and later he becomes ministers and so on. And you see what these guys are doing. And it was sensible things. And there's absolutely no problem of Hindus or Muslims or Jains or whatever getting along and doing stuff. But it was because of Mahatma Gandhi's craziness and, that he took surrender unilaterally. God alone knows why. But Motilal Nehru's craziness was even greater. He said, we must enter the legislative assemblies, not to do anything useful, but to prove that nothing useful can be done in the legislative assemblies. Chittaranjan Das also joined him in it. But Das dropped dead quite soon. But look at the craziness of this. This is mad. You see, suppose you don't tell anybody, you keep it a secret. We're joining this to show it's useless. Okay, it's stupid, but it's not completely mad. But if you say, we must join to show it is useless, then what people will say is, yeah, it's useless because you fucking useless bastards made it useless, you know. And this is, of course, I'll come back to this in my second video. The policy, you know, the ability of Nehruvian, what keeps Nehruvianism alive, is being stupider than the most stupid, and it's survival of the stupid dust, and most useless. And, you know, really being useless, that is, and saying, I'm going to prove this, I'm useless, and then proving it, that's Nehruvian greatness. But let's see why that's actually a useful thing. You know, why, for Darwinian reasons, it won. But I'll come to that in the next video.